There is, in the heart of Central America, a stretch of land that for more than a century has captured the attention of strategists, investors, engineers, and governments dreaming of controlling one of the most valuable routes on the planet. We are not talking about the Panama Canal, but about Nicaragua. It is precisely there that a gigantic, controversial, and deeply mistrusted project has once again gained momentum. The construction of an interoceanic canal roughly 445 kilometers long, designed to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific and create a new passage for large vessels. At first glance, this may seem like just another grand infrastructure promise. One of those ideas that explodes into political discourse and then fades when reality sets in. But when you look at who could benefit from this project, who feels threatened by it, and the exact moment in history when this idea is resurfacing, the issue takes on a completely different scale. The debate stops being merely technical and begins to involve sovereignty, influence, bargaining power, and geopolitical repositioning right in the middle of Latin America. The project was pushed back into the spotlight by Daniel Ortega's government, which has presented it as a historic opportunity to transform Nicaragua into a new hub of international trade. The promise is ambitious: attract foreign capital, generate jobs on a massive scale, stimulate economic growth, and position the country as an alternative maritime route between two oceans. At a time when the Panama Canal is facing operational pressure and structural limitations, Nicaragua's proposal has started to sound to some observers like a bold response to the growing bottlenecks of global commerce. But that is exactly where the story becomes more tense. The real question is not simply whether such a canal would be useful, but who would be willing to finance it, with what interests, and with what consequences. The estimated cost stands at around $65 billion, a monumental figure for any country in the region, especially for an economy with obvious financial limitations and a strong dependence on external capital. That means the project, if it is ever truly built, will inevitably require robust international backing and partners willing to turn investment into strategic influence. This is the point where China and Russia move into the center of the narrative. Even without a fully confirmed and widely consolidated financial commitment, the mere association of these powers with the project is enough to raise the temperature of the debate. When an undertaking of this size appears in a sensitive part of the map and becomes linked to strategic rivals of the United States, it stops being just an infrastructure promise. It becomes a geopolitical signal, a diplomatic message, and a piece in a struggle far larger than Nicaragua itself. To understand why this plan creates so much unease, it is important to remember that Nicaragua did not start dreaming about this canal today. The idea dates back to the 19th century, when the country's geography was already seen as a natural alternative to Panama. There were possible routes, large bodies of water, and a strategic location for an interoceanic crossing. Before the Panama Canal became the main passage between the oceans, the Nicaraguan route was seriously considered by major powers. In other words, this project revives an old geopolitical dream that never completely disappeared. That dream gained renewed strength in the 21st century, when the Nicaraguan government advanced a partnership with the Hong Kong-Nicaragua Canal Development Group, linked to businessman Wang Jing. At that time, the plan called for a canal of about 278 kilometers crossing Lake Nicaragua, and it was sold as a historic transformation for the country. The message sounded very similar to the current one: wealth, modernization, jobs, and the creation of a real alternative to the Panama Canal. On paper, The proposal looked enormous. In practice, however, it ran into deep obstacles before it could become reality. Financing failed to move forward as expected. Social resistance grew, local communities protested, and environmentalists began warning of severe risks to biodiversity and to the affected territories. Little by little, the project lost momentum until it became a symbol of gigantic ambition surrounded by uncertainty. In 2024, the previous concession was officially canceled, and many believed that this would be the definitive end of the idea. Yet, Ortega's government chose to do the exact opposite of what skeptics expected. Instead of burying the plan, it decided to reposition it and bring it back into the international debate. That is how a new version of the project emerged, with a redesigned route, renewed rhetoric, and an attempt to answer the criticisms that had weakened the earlier proposal. This time, the route would no longer cross Lake Nicaragua, one of the most heavily criticized elements of the old plan. According to the design that was presented, the canal would begin in Bluefields on the Caribbean coast, pass through areas connected to Lake Xolotlan, and continue toward Puerto Corinto on the Pacific. The change was intended to suggest that the project had been reformulated to appear more viable, more defensible, and less vulnerable to political erosion. In addition to the new route, the plan returned with the promise of an infrastructure capable of receiving gigantic vessels. With a width ranging from 290 to 540 meters and a depth of up to 27 meters. In theory, it would be a passage suitable for supertankers and mega cargo ships that currently face restrictions on other routes. If it worked, Nicaragua could present itself to the world as a next-generation logistics corridor capable of competing for relevance with one of the most important infrastructures on the planet. The problem is that, between political rhetoric and actual execution, there is an abyss filled with technical, legal, social, environmental, and financial obstacles. From an engineering point of view, the challenge is immense. Building a canal on this scale would require unprecedented interventions in Central America, involving complex terrain, sophisticated drainage systems, possible artificial reservoirs, and the need to confront seismic risks, volcanic activity, and severe climate variations. Water availability is also a critical factor. The Panama Canal itself depends on a delicate hydrological balance to operate, and trying to reproduce or even surpass that model on an even larger route would dramatically increase costs, risks, and the difficulty of execution. The environmental dimension of the project is, for many specialists, even more explosive. There are warnings about the risk of large-scale deforestation, contamination of bodies of water, fragmentation of ecosystems, damage to biodiversity, and the displacement of local and indigenous communities. In addition, the country's record weighs against the official narrative, since earlier phases of the initiative were marked by international criticism and questions about the lack of proper consultation with affected populations. That means that even before any construction advances, the canal already carries a legacy of social tension, institutional distrust, and political conflict. It is in this context that geopolitics fully enters the scene. China is seen as a power that has expanded its presence in infrastructure, energy, logistics, and strategic corridors around the world. Russia, in turn, appears as a political and symbolic partner in moves that challenge Washington's traditional influence in the region. When these two powers appear around a project of this magnitude, international perception changes. The canal stops being merely a national development plan and begins to be read as part of a wider struggle for influence over routes, flows, and sensitive points of global trade. On the other side of this equation stands the Panama Canal, which remains one of the most important maritime routes in the world. With more than a century of operation, consolidated infrastructure, and a central role in international commerce, Panama does not lose relevance overnight. Even so, its recent challenges have opened space for alternatives to be watched more closely. And perhaps that is where the real force of this story lies, in the mixture of the plausible and the improbable. The Nicaragua Canal may never leave the drawing board, but its very reappearance already reveals the scale of the strategic disputes now underway. If you want to keep following analyses like this about geopolitics, power, and the hidden forces that may reshape the world, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, does this canal have a real chance of becoming reality? Or is all of this still part of a much bigger game?